He clawed at our door and left disturbing notes. There was a period in time where I had to live with 3 roommates in an apartment. This apartment was a community with tons of buildings and a pool for everyone to use. It was very nice from the outside, but the landlords and services were terrible, like refusing to fix our air conditioning in the middle of summer. But that's another story. About a week or so after we moved in, October 2016, my roommates Jeff, Kylie, and Kristen and I returned from the store after light grocery shopping. We met a strange individual, an older man in his 40s wearing sweatpants all the way up to his chest. He obviously was mentally challenged, so we were nothing but nice to him, greeted him, and stated our names. After all of us but Kylie returned to the apartment to put groceries away, she decided to invite him inside for some soda and chats. I've always been very socially awkward and a bit of an introvert, so I avoided talking to new people and did my own thing. A couple days passed and we get a knock on the door. It's the man again. We didn't mind too much. It was the middle of the day and we were for the most part home, so Kylie lets him in and we do some art together. But it began to get more and more habitual. When I was having a drinking night with Kristen, we received a knock on the door at 7 or 8 p.m. We found this to be strange. Kristen opens the door and it's the man again, asking for Kylie. I made it very obvious I didn't want him in, but she said, "Oh, she's out, but she should be home in a little while, I think." The man replies, "Can I have a soda?" Kristen agreed, and he proceeded to let himself in without her inviting him, and he sat down by me. It was a truly awkward experience, considering the two of us rarely spoke to him. Thankfully, Kylie came home shortly after, so I could ditch the room and let her talk to him. Things began to get worse. Kylie was fed up with him coming over every day, and we decided to try to avoid him for a bit. Every now and then, we would hear scratching on the door. We simply turned off the lights and stayed quiet until it stopped. I think at one point, Kylie tried talking to him about not being comfortable with him coming over so often, but I can't confirm that. It started to escalate a bit more when we came home one day and found a bunch of drawings taped to our door. We brought them inside and looked at them. I wish I still had the pictures of them, but it was so long ago. They were sketches of each of us and Christian's cat. They were distorted in a strange way, like his perception was obscure or just a really bad artist. This sparkled a series of basically every night we had to sit in the dark while he scratched at our door and knocked. We would keep weapons nearby, just because you never know what someone is capable of. The door was always locked, but I don't recall him ever trying anything more than just the scratching. We decided to take some action and talk to the landlord's office about it. They said they couldn't do anything, and we had to call the police. We didn't want to call the police because we were certain this man had some sort of disability, so we did the only thing we could think of. We ghosted him. The next thing we found on our door was a huge language booklet. It was filled with scratchy notes written in pen, words crossed out and written over, multiple languages and poems. We kept the evidence in a cabinet, just in case we decided later to report it. Some months went by over the course of this happening. It was the mist of winter, and we received our final gift from our strange friend, a letter. I can't recount exactly what it said, but it was something along the lines of, "Why have you all stopped talking to me? Do you not want to be friends anymore? I'm very angry with you." But sprawled over 2 paragraphs, I remember we felt a level of fear and discomfort with his letter, so we continued to ghost until he eventually stopped. I ended up moving out before the next autumn. My roommates were a little too party animal for me, I guess. I hope to this strange man that we don't meet again. They left a note. "Hi, let's not meet. I'm a long-time lurker, first-time poster. For context, I'm a tiny 24-year-old woman, and I live with my boyfriend in a very small apartment complex, maybe 30 units in a pretty safe town. We've been there for almost 2 years, but this story takes place late October 2017. Also important, my designated parking space is the farthest from the entrance to our complex, and it borders the back gravel lot, which is for visitors or residents who don't have a designated space. My boyfriend parks there because we were only given one spot, so that back lot is the left to my space, and the space to the right of me is vacant and unassigned and has been over a year. A few months before this story takes place, a white van had periodically been parking in the vacant space to the right of me, but not consistently. They would usually park in the back lot or in one of the 4 marked visitor spaces. However, it became increasingly frequent that they would park next to me, although there were closer spots that were also as vacant as the one next to me. It was a Sunday, I believe, and I'd just gotten home from getting my hair cut. I pulled into the parking lot and noticed a charcoal gray sedan with heavily tinted windows in that vacant spot next to mine, and the car was running. I found this odd because there were several designated and visitor spots open, and I'd never seen this car before. As I was pulling into my space, the gray car shut off. I am naturally cautious, and this seemed odd to me as well. I was listening to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon and wanted to finish the song I was on, so I waited a few minutes because I couldn't leave a good song unfinished, but mostly because I felt anxious and I felt like I was being watched. I tried to reason with myself that they were waiting for someone maybe. I know I have a tendency to be paranoid, I know that, but I still need to collect myself before leaving my car. After the song, I turned off my car and hurried inside, where my boyfriend was waiting for us to get ready to go meet his family for his brother's birthday outing. We were in the apartment for about 20 minutes while I changed clothes. We walked out to the gravel lot where his car was parked, and I noticed that the charcoal gray car was no longer next to my car. It was now next to my boyfriend's car. And it was running again. At this point, I mentioned to him how odd it was that they were still here and had moved to the visitor lot. We were out for a few hours, but I didn't notice the car when we got back. The next day I had off from work. I got in my car to go pick up groceries, and there was a note on my windshield. I immediately began to shake. Somehow as I grabbed it, I knew it was from the people in that gray car. I was so panicked, I couldn't fully read what they wrote to me. I just started crying as a fear response. And I have panic disorder, so thanks for the panic attack, peeps from the gray car. I won't quote the entire thing, because much of it was very graphic. Here is what I will share. Hi. You must not remember us. At approximately 5:32 p.m. on the 29th of October, you pulled up next to us, and although you appear preoccupied and pensive, we couldn't help but stare. We are serious about pleasing others, and will be honored to be the ones to train you. I'm 6'2", 175 pounds, 25 years old. She's 5'7", 112 pounds, 22 years old. They share incredibly detailed plans, which I did not ask for, you can guess, whatever. I was able to compose myself. I went to pick up groceries, called my boyfriend, and he came home from his lunch break, and we emailed our landlord. He went back to work, and I spent the rest of the day in shock. I felt so violated. This is my home. This is supposed to be a safe place, and these strangers violated that. I don't shame them for their kinks, but this is not the way to go about that. They came to my home, they painted a picture of me, and them, that I didn't ask for, or that I didn't want, and they gave me a reason to be paranoid and afraid that they would make the disgusting picture a reality. It took a few days, but I did call the police. They came up to our apartment, I told my story, and they collected a note that was left. I keep a daily journal and document the contents of the note before they took it, so the quote above is accurate word for word. They ended up calling the creeps, but I never heard back. Interestingly enough, though, I never saw that white van that used to occasionally park next to me after that. I was so surprised, because I didn't expect the police to take this seriously at all, because of some of the stories on here. I didn't expect the caring response they gave. My boss changed my schedule up, so I get home when it was still light out, and I called my friends or boyfriend every time I walked to and from my car for a few weeks. This was a difficult post to write, and I'm holding back on sharing the full extent of how I felt. What I know is, it was strange that they were parked next to me, with all the open spaces. It was strange they turned their car off when I parked. It was strange that in the 20 minutes I was in my apartment, they were still in the lot, but had moved spaces. It was strange the car was still running. It was strange that the mysterious van stopped showing up after the police called the people in the gray car. It was all just strange. They left enough info that I was able to look them up on Facebook, and had one mutual friend with the guy, who was an old heroin junkie coworker, who I immediately blocked and unfriended. It's been a while since that incident, but I'm still vigilant when waking up to our apartment because I get off work very late. I'm extra cautious of my surroundings, and I trust myself when I feel that a situation isn't quite right. The most unnerving part, aside from the graphic plan, is still the fact that while I was composing myself in my car, they saw, and they made it very known, that they were watching me, and that they knew I was uncomfortable. But I'm glad I sought help. I'm glad I had a large support group, and most importantly, I'm glad those creeps haven't tried to contact me since this. Thank you for reading. Blue Van Creep and Disturbing Messages. When I was little, I lived in a very safe neighborhood. All the neighbors were friends or relatives of friends, and this being the late 80s, we were allowed to roam and play, as long as we were back by dinner. The earliest encounter I can remember with this creep was when I was around 6 years old. I was with a group of other kids riding bikes down the steep hill that led down into our neighborhood. One of the older kids noticed a man standing against the fence at the top of the hill, honestly not far from a parked blue van. I did not recognize him, but that didn't mean anything at the time. I had only just been allowed to leave the yard and assumed I didn't know everyone in the area yet. I don't know why, but we all went over to him. I'd been told to stay with the group, so I followed along behind. I don't remember much about him, only that he seemed to pay an extraordinary amount of attention to me. Even after the other kids wandered off to continue riding their bikes, he kept talking to me. I remember very clearly now when he asked my age and I told him. He smiled and said I looked much younger, at least 12 or 13. I guess this was supposed to be a compliment, but I was aware of how much younger I looked and was compared to everyone else. I didn't have a bike because I was too small to press the pedals, and I even had pigtails with ribbons in them. I don't know if he creeped me out exactly, but I quickly excused myself and rejoined the group. I think I felt more insulted than anything, like he was making fun of me by pointing out that I did not really belong with a group of mostly teenagers. Eventually I went home and didn't tell my parents about the man. In my mind, he was an adult, and I wasn't allowed to question adults. Stranger danger was never much of a thing in my family. Skip ahead 3 years, it was Christmas time. I was 9 years old, and I finally been given my very own bike. It wasn't a little bike either. I was so proud of it. I had to go and try it, despite the cold weather. Of course, my parents allowed it. I headed out to the hill, all alone, because it was Christmas, and no one was going to come play on Christmas morning. I had spent about 20 minutes rocketing down the hill on my cherry red bicycle, and wiped out once, skimming my palms, when I started to notice a blue van driving by slowly and repeatedly. I didn't remember the previous encounter with a man with a blue van, like for any 6-year-old. It was completely inconsequential at the time, and I quickly forgot. This van drove down the road, past the drive into the neighborhood at least 3 times, and I had this strange feeling, like a tingling down my spine, as if someone were watching me. I never had this feeling before in my life, and the only way I can describe it is that it was a visceral, primitive warning that you are now the prey to something very dangerous. Luckily, I kept my cool. I kept riding and watched that same van driving slowly, by back and forth, at least a dozen times. Finally, when it passed me for the last time and disappeared behind some trees, I booked it down the hill, using gravity and every bit of strength in my legs to build up enough speed to get me all the way to the end of the drive and into the yard without stopping. Quite a feat since my house was the very last one. I ditched my brand new bike in the grass and ran inside to safety. Again, I didn't tell my parents, half because I felt like I was being silly, and half because my mom was cooking and my dad was watching TV, 2 activities that were never to be interrupted in my house on threat of spanking. I never saw the blue van again. I didn't find out until I was 29 exactly how lucky I was that day. After my father's death, I helped my mother clear out his house. I found in a box an old answering machine, a bunch of tapes and a tape player, knowing the narcissist my father was. I assumed they were a combination of old messages from nearly 3 decades ago, and him singing badly and playing the guitar even frickin' worse. I took the whole thing home and listened to the tapes, mostly for nostalgia. I was right, but they were not just missed calls from friends and family. I was not in any way prepared for the absolute filth that was going on in those answering machine tapes. I'm not one to blush at bad language, and though I may not use some of the words I hear myself, it doesn't bother me when others do, but this made me physically sick. Maybe because it was directed at me, at a child me. Entire hour-long tapes were filled with this one man calling repeatedly, saying some polite-sounding variation of, "This message is for me. If you could let her know, I'd appreciate it." Then nothing but graphic, vulgar descriptions of what he planned to do to me step by step, how he wouldn't hurt me too much, and that he'd make sure to leave me somewhere my parents could find me when he was done. I don't know if he meant alive or not. He called me his girlfriend and said just how pretty I was. There were long tributes to my blonde hair and how he planned to keep it after he defiled it, that he'd wash it first. He wasn't dirty like that. All the most filthy language that you wouldn't even find in porn. The messages stopped abruptly right around when I was 10 years old. After that, it was nothing but the usual missed calls messages again. I don't know what happened to the man. He didn't really sound like the kind of person to just give up. Maybe he ended up in jail or dead, but I don't know that my dad had a tendency of handling things himself. I know of at least 2 other incidences when someone was bothering my mom or me, and they stopped after he went to have a talk with them. I also, looking back, suspect my father was a genuine psychopath in a clinical sense. He was also a Marine sniper once upon a time. I destroyed those tapes because I didn't want my mother finding them if she knew. I have no plans to bring up now if she didn't. I don't want her to ever know for her own peace of mind. I kinda wish I had it now, though, so I could let you guys hear some of the things he said, but this was years before I discovered Reddit. She started finding notes on her walk home. After telling my mother about some stories from this subreddit, she revealed to me the following story from her childhood, which I found truly shocking and disturbing. When my mom was in 5th grade, she went to a grade school only a few blocks from her house. Therefore, it was not uncommon for her to walk to and from school with her childhood friend and neighbor Pam. Now, as young and naive children, they were in their own little worlds and didn't really understand the disturbing events that were about to take place. One day on their walk home from school, they were walking past a park they walked to by every single day and stumbled across a note. In this note were explicit and disturbing sexual scenes that my mother did not tell me details of. She did, however, have a look of complete and utter shock when she recalled them. She told me that back then, Pam and her thought nothing of it and only laughed at the ridiculousness of it, as little girls do when approached with the icky topic of sex. They kept the note and walked on, forgetting about it quickly, but soon enough, they found another note on their usual path home, another note describing sexual details that little girls should never be exposed to. At this point, my mother told my grandmother about it. Times were different back then, and my grandma, although bothered that her daughter was being exposed to such inappropriate notes, wasn't too worried about it. The notes just kept popping up. My mom and Pan simply thought that maybe they were accidentally uncovering notes that someone was leaving for their lover, who happened to be in the same demented sex acts as they were. Yet, these two young girls really didn't want to find these notes any longer, and decided to walk a different pathway home every day instead. This is where it gets freaky. They started taking her routes that followed completely different streets and did not at all go near the park that they once found the notes in. Yet, they began finding these notes once again on their new way home. My mom told me that the note she remembered most was a description of what semen tastes like. They found this note tucked away in a little red box beside a tree. The last note they found, after dozens of them, before they told their parents and teachers, said something like the following: "There's a man in a van who would like to pick up the redhead and her friend." My mom is at this point a 12-year-old redhead. The contents of this last note, an expression of the man's desire to abduct a red-headed mother and her friend, showed undoubtedly that the notes that they had been finding for the past 2 years of walking home from school had been meant for them. All the deviant sexual acts and the odd description of semen flavor and fetishes all were meant for these two prepubescent girls. Perhaps the most disturbing part of this is the fact that he knew the ways and times they walked home. He knew them well enough to strategically put these notes where only they would find them, and he knew to switch the locations when they began taking other pathways home. Ultimately, my mother never noticed the man in a van watching her and her friend walk home because, like I said, they were silly girls lost in their own little world, but my mom knows now that he was there watching, writing these sick fantasies for her to read. The school was informed of what was happening, and although no police action or anything like that was ever taken place, the boys of her class volunteered to walk them home and made sure they got home safe. The notes never showed up again.